Here we go.
So we're going to go ahead and move on to the roundtable discussion. And just to give sort of a quick summary of our incredible lineup of guests, today we have Andrea Malave. She is a spokesperson for Alianza Mujeres Viequenses and a student at the University of Puerto Rico at Vieques. We're also joined by Steve Morris from the Veterans for Peace Climate Crisis and Militarism Committee. We're also joined by Jack Cohen-Joppa, co-editor of The Nuclear Resistor and member of the steering committee for the International Campaign to Ban Uranium Weapons. And last but not least, we are also joined by Camille Landry, a co-coordinator for AFGJ and the Lucy Parsons Popular Human Rights School. So just to kind of kick it off, I wanted to start off with Andrea, because so much of our the main topics that we're exploring today have to deal with the impacts of war and imperialism on our climate, on all forms of life that, are threatened by war and by the interest of elites, who only care for oil and for their own profits. I wanted to ask Andrea a bit about what has the struggle been looking like in Vieques, particularly for young people, for organizers, as Puerto Rico, or Borinquen, right, is continuing to struggle for its autonomy and self-determination as it continues being essentially what is a U.S. colony. So if you wanted to kick it off and maybe tell us a little bit about some of the historic struggle encountered in Vieques.
First of all, hi, thanks for the opportunity for us to talk about what's happening right now in history through an island, on an island in Vieques. I'm going to give you a little backstory of what happened in Vieques, how the militarism get there. They were 60 years of active activity of weapons, different type of weapons, different type of countries too, that
I guess we lost connection. Let's see.
Oh, now she's back.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, different countries that practice their military skills or new weapons in the zone of Vieques, Puerto Rico. For different years, the location of Vieques, it's very richful. It's a very good spot in the Caribbean and have been used to for militarism. The people in Vieques, since the beginning fight, they didn't want the presence of the militarism. Vieques was an island that produced a lot of agriculture, and that was the first of all the things that Viequenses had that were they get that from them. They just say, okay, we're going to move you in this street with all your belongings, and you're going to start a new life. And that's how they start. Viequenses, like I said, fought, the fishermen fought during different times in history. Some people know that in 2003, different organizations and Puerto Ricans and people from different places help us to get them to stop the practices and leave the island. And what happened then? The places of Vieques that have been used by the militarism were moved to the Department of Interior of United States. Right now, those areas are not they are not for the government of Puerto Rico. Right now, they don't have power in that areas because they have to clean. And that's the different fight that we have right now, because they stop, but they are still in control of our land, of the land that we used to farm, to eat, to get fishes, to just recreate. We can't use it right now. So more than the trauma that they leave to the people and the woman and the guards and everyone that was in Vieques, they leave a mark in health that it just have been silenced, because Vieques, it's a data, it's a medical data that have the most percentage per area of cancer in Puerto Rico. We don't have like an actual study that says that it's because of the air that comes from the east to the west, from the west to the east, and cover all the island with all the different things that they throw to the air, right? But we know that our people is sick in Vieques. There are no fast food. We don't have different other things that we can put on the cancer, right? So we have different projects of different people in their personal business that wanted to get analysis of the soil, of the air, and it has been a lot of hard, because, well, we have other issues, because you can order to analyze a soil that will get the United States of America to clean up and say that they sick us, that they did a lot of bad things to us because it's bad publicity. But we have a lot of people that want it and know that there's information, so we can ask for a cleaner way to clean the island. Another thing that has been happening, it's that we don't have a hospital, we don't have a good system of transportation to the main island, we don't have medical services for kids, vaccination, we don't have a good education either. And from the Alianza of Mujeres Viequenses, that started as a way to give women a better place, a better conditions in Vieques. Right now we have the same problems, but with more that have been added up through the years. So yes, the presence of the militarism back of everything that was progressing and developing in Vieques. Vieques was stopped for 60 years. They didn't develop nothing. They just developed a brainwashed people that just aspire to get married to a Marine, or that the US government give us a lot of money and we can be nothing without them, and more of that. But in terms of the responsibility that they have, because we have laws, right? We have Superfund, we have different laws that we try to use it to get them to do what they have to do, because they have to clean with the better technology available. They are not doing that. They are not saying, okay, we're going to have these explosions because right now they bomb, we say quema abierta, that it's through the air. They reunite all the different things that they found, and they gather up and just have a camera, a locked camera, but it's not locked, it's open camera. So it's an explosion. The explosion makes a mushroom. There is a lot of evidence that we have, fishermen have, everyone have, because you can see it. It's very big. And then on that mushroom go through the wind, and the explosion is in the east, and the wind go from east to west, and all the island and parts of Fajardo and Ceiba too are contaminated with those pollution. What happened is that we can't prove it. We can prove that our air is bad, that our soils are bad, that our water is bad, and right now that's one of what we want to, for people and other organizations to know, that we are trying to evidence what they did to us so they can clean it up like the law forced them.
Certainly, and I mean, when we know that the Navy has admitted to using napalm, depleted uranium, and so many other toxic chemicals and heavy metals on the island, like you've mentioned before, and it's been for 6 decades. So, you know, from 1940 to 2000s, right, we've seen this detrimental impact that's obviously going to severely damage so much of the agriculture, access to water, right? And you know, it's also coupled with so much of the civil disobedience and militant organizing that the people of Yekes and that folks like yourself are continuing to engage in, right? Because so much of this struggle, I'm sure, is certainly a decolonial struggle, no? Now, you know, I would like to know, you know, and other folks can also jump in, you know, whether it's really particularly realistic for us to think that the US military or Navy, which is now instructed to, you know, clean up this area, if they're really going to care or do it, because we've seen Puerto Rico continuously be ignored. We've seen it just suffer the consequences of being forced and subjugated as a colony of the United States. And it's quite ironic, no, because what was originally a Navy range is now, you know, a federal wildlife refuge, but it's also a Superfund site. It's a toxic area identified for cleanup by the government. And, you know, I cannot imagine the strife that's coupled with that when, you know, you are trying to fight for autonomy and fight for the ability to have health, right? You know, Vieques, like you mentioned, has the highest cancer rate in all of Puerto Rico. And also, you know, kind of incorporating the theme of depleted uranium and how that not only has consequential impacts on our water and our soil, but also our own personal health. I would also love to know what our other member here that we're having this ongoing conversation with, Jack Cohen-Jop. I know that you've being the co-editor of the Nuclear Resistor and member of the steering committee for the International Campaign to Ban Uranium Weapons. I know you focus a little bit more on Iraq, so I don't know if you see any sort of similarities from what is happening in Puerto Rico to things that you've personally studied and organized.
Well, certainly the fact that in any military situation, the toxins are not just like one or two, but there are multiple toxins that are interacting with each other, and the synergistic relationship, you know, on the people in the area makes it impossible, as Andrea was pointing out, to say that, yes, this is, you know, verifiably the cause of this individual's illness. making the connection between that specific toxin in that specific place with this particular person, it's like identifying which brand of cigarettes gave your dad cancer from smoking, all those years. Who can you pin it on within the legal structure that exists currently? And so that hints at the systemic nature of the problem in resolving this sort of a situation that Andrea was talking about as well. And what I was thinking about when Andrea was talking about the history of resistance to Vieques, it goes all the way back to Albizu Campos, who was poisoned in federal prison by radiation while he was doing time for resisting the military in Puerto Rico, and continues up through the activity of the Viequenses, who kicked the Navy out in 2001. And they finally left, I guess, in 2003. Andrea was saying, we were just talking about the nuclear resistor. At one point, there were over 130 people in federal prison in Vieques in the summer of 2001 at the same time, because they had gone out and begun to reoccupy, what's now the wildlife preserve or whatever they call it on the eastern end of the island. But yeah, to come back to the killer is lost in the crowd. There is a growing international awareness of the toxic environment that military activity leaves in its wake, whether there's an active war or not. And war just compounds the issue, because there is no accountability, no inventory of what happened. In Vieques, there was no chronicle of how much of what kind of toxins were involved in the munitions. When things explode, they create other related toxins, not the original ones that they were made with. They combine with the environment to create entirely new chemicals that the impact on humans and other life forms. It's difficult to comprehend the magnitude, and let alone begin to measure it. So that's been my experience that we see, and then certainly talking about Iraq, that's certainly what we see in the use of military toxics in modern warfare. If you look at the last major wars that the United States was involved in.
Let me say that the United States government saying that before they can truly either take responsibility for their actions or clean up the effects of their actions is really a straw man argument. It's a specious argument. It's a bullshit argument, for the plain and simple reason that common sense will tell you it's no one single thing. There might be a particular chemical that's a result of a burn pit, or the result of other military action or other natural action for that matter. But looking for that one chemical does not explain the cancer rate. It does not explain the injury done to human beings and to the entire ecosphere, because this one chemical might be in the air. But if it's in the air, it's in the water. And if it's in the water, it's in the soil. And if it's in the soil, it is in not only the people who eat the vegetables that grow out of the soil, but the animals who eat the vegetables, and then we in turn consume them. And for every iteration in the ecosphere, in the web, cows eat the grass. Okay, and then we eat the cow, we're getting a larger and more concentrated dose of the toxin than the cow is getting. When you talk about the marine environment, it can start with the pollution of the algae and of the zooplankton, the animal plankton, and then build up through each successive thing. And so each successive level, little fish is eaten by the big fish, which is then eaten by the bigger fish, and ultimately ends up on our table. So you're eating tuna that has eaten several different levels of that environment, of that ecological web. And with each successive one, those toxins are building up in a more and more concentrated and harmful way. And so it's madness, and it's illogical, and it's a BS argument that they're trying to use just to blur the field and fail to take responsibility. The ecology, the natural environment is all interdependent. That's why if we kill all the bees, we're all going to die, because we are so totally dependent upon what organisms at the lower, rank of the ecosystem are doing. If we pollute the Amazon through military action, or because we're clear cutting to grow hamburger for McDonald's, basically, then we're not just affecting the Amazon, we're affecting the entire planet, because the Amazonian region contributes a significant portion of the oxygen that we all breathe. And so it's really impossible to draw false lines and say, well, this is a problem for this nation and for that nation, or we're looking for one specific toxin or another. That ain't the way it works.
If I could say something about my own experience, I was in the Army for 2 years. I was sent from the stockade, where I passed out leaflets and was busted for that, to Vietnam. I spent 4 months in Vietnam and was sent back for agitating too. But I was a typical soldier, was there a year, and I was there only 4 months. However, I have gotten 2 cancers for which the Veterans Administration says the presumptive cause of those is Agent Orange, for veterans who were there at that particular time, for 1961 to 1971. They're in remission. I'm in good shape now, but they are bladder cancer and hairy cell leukemia. Now, it was only a year and a half ago that they put bladder cancer on that list. Many Vietnam veterans had died by that time. It's much, much later. I think, like in Veterans for Peace, anti-war veterans are, we make the connection between health problems that have affected veterans and veterans' children and what we have perpetrated through war, like Agent Orange has affected the Vietnamese much more than veterans and their children. Millions of people. It's still in the water. They don't want to publicize it because they want to export their rice, and they don't want to talk about that. It's really still there. Unexploded ordnance. 2/3 of Superfund sites are military bases, and then post-Vietnam, as mentioned, depleted uranium, burn pits, affecting both people in those countries and veterans.
So this is kind of an open-ended question for everybody, but I think a lot of us are either well-informed or have had the lived experience of both the intersection of the crimes of imperialism, and the impact on the environments that we all share, and also the bodies that we currently inhabit. So I think I'm immediately drawn to ask, right, in what ways can we organize, and what are some lessons, I especially think, Steve, I know that your sort of initiation to organizing was, growing up in a Quaker household, and then trying to infiltrate during the Vietnam War, sending out, pamphlets, anti-war pamphlets and literature. And so, and I know, Camille, right before our call, you sort of had mentioned, some of the lessons of previous organizing. So what are some of the biggest takeaways from that? And then too, imperialism is something that is continuously morphing and changing, right? It's not divorced from technological advancements. It's not divorced from also just the new kinds of media and information dissemination in general. So sort of gathering from our historical memory, what are things that we should keep in mind still as we organize now? And also, what are some of the challenges, I think, that are the most present as I think we're all sort of collected to make the serious connection between You can't just talk about climate and not talk about imperialism. You can't talk about climate justice and not talk about war. Yeah, so I open-ended question, anybody can jump in.
Let me say a quick thing here. One thing that absolutely will not solve our problem is individual action. I don't care how much you recycle. I don't care how often you refrain from buying water and plastic bottles and all of those other kinds of nice, lovely sounding, warm and fuzzy things that we all do and people should do, because we should all be good individual stewards of our environment. But that does not even chip away in any recognizable or quantifiable way at the issue of climate change, at the issue of environmental damage. It has to be systemic. And ending militarism is one of the major things that can be done. And that's both harder to do and a lot less sexy than doing neighborhood recycling programs or encouraging people not to buy bottled water. The environmental impact of war starts long before the war starts and continues long after the war is over. People have estimated, geographers have estimated that military lands are covering about 5 or 6% of the total surface of the earth. And they tend to cluster around areas that are ecologically sensitive, like the area right at the shoreline, where a river meets the sea, is a really important natural mechanism to clean water that goes into the ocean. But when you build a naval base there, that water is not filtering through the land in a way that is sustainable. In fact, they're adding pollution rather than allowing the natural world to remove the pollution. And so the single biggest thing that we can do to protect this planet is to end militarism and imperialism and neocolonialism with all the extractive BS that is used against the target, the colonial nation's targets. That more than any other single thing would change what's going on with the climate, which very well may be on the tipping point already.
Can I talk a little about single issue organizing and multi-issue organizing? Because back in the Vietnam War, it was massive, millions of people, but there was a lot of, some people were not taking on racism. So it was very important to connect racism. And in a couple of ways that racism was working was there was racism against the Vietnamese people, because in order to get people to be willing to kill people they have no reason to, you have to push racism, and the army sure did it. And then there was the racism of, say, Black and Latino soldiers who were much more likely to be on the front lines, that kind of thing. So that issue was very important to try to bring together, and there was some success at doing that and some lack of success. Now, currently, the project I'm on, of Veterans for Peace, Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, is trying to bring together climate and militarism. So we have a slideshow we've shown to about 90 groups, and we're trying to, like groups that are anti-war, we're trying to bring climate information to them. Although that's more likely to be the case, that they're already working on climate stuff. But the climate groups, environmental groups, are not necessarily oriented toward militarism. In fact, that ends up being a lot of what we're trying to do, like the 350.org chapters. Some of them are interested in seeing our slideshow. And so the reason that's true, I think there are two main reasons. One is that the United States has been able to have military emissions not counted and not reported. And the other reason is kind of this fog around militarism that occurs in the US, where maybe I'll read a little from our brochure. Militarism in the US is considered indispensable, unchangeable, benign, and or invisible. Money for the military in war 21 trillion in the last 2 decades appears to come from some magical source and without the limitations applied to programs that improve social well-being. And, you know, the Pentagon has not passed an audit. They just failed another audit. They've never passed an audit. But there's no, it's hard to get this accountability. We have to change the culture. But so emissions have not been reported. So a lot of what we're trying to do is we're trying to get that to happen, because that, it seems like that has to be a first step toward reducing them, reducing the emissions, reducing the money spent for militarism and militarism. Because when you spend money for militarism, it's not just that $1 trillion you don't have, but it's also, they want to make sure that they continue to need militarism. So they don't want negotiations about the Ukraine war. They resisted that. That was back in March and April. That was an option that the United States did not take. So, well, I've talked enough for a while. Let me pass it to somebody.
When you're talking about greenhouse gases, that's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I worked for several years on a program that the Obama administration put into place to track greenhouse gases. And I cannot tell you I work for an oil company, by the way. I can't tell you how much kickback there was to even counting it, because, counting it means that ultimately you have to take responsibility for it. So I'm certain that we do not have truly accurate figures already. And they most assuredly did exempt the military, which is, again, one of the single largest contributors in the entire world to environmental pollution. And also, not coincidentally, my first cousin wrote the computer program that was used to collate the data and report the data. So I was involved in this for some years. And one of the things that is very, very clear is that it isn't just US militarism. First of all, other militaries are also very much complicit, but it is a mistake to focus only on war. You have to build and you have to sustain those physical installations, the infrastructure. You have to build the jet planes and the ships and the munitions and the rifles. You have to grow the cotton and create the polyester that go into uniforms and tents. You have to mine the ore that makes everything from the spoons used in the kitchen and the pots, to the metal that's used in the weapons and armaments. You have to build buildings and all of these things. So when you're talking about the greenhouse gas emissions relative to the military or to any other corporation or industry or process, you're talking about an ongoing thing. And if you think about it, there is a quantitative difference in a single assault on the environment or anything else. You can take one punch, but being pummeled day after day after day for generations is a whole different level of damage to the environment and to the people that make up the environment, and the other organisms that make up the environment. And so militarism has caused long-lasting changes. Europe is still dealing with the trench warfare of World War I that disrupted the agricultural lands and many of the cities in Europe and caused damage that they are still dealing with. This stuff does not go away overnight, even if you do try to fix it.
Certainly that's the case in Iraq. When I think about, the long-term consequences, and as the introduction of the program pointed out, the systematic I'm getting a little feedback. The systematic destruction of the water supplies and the supplies. I'm getting feedback, so I'll be quiet here.
I think I suspect what you were getting ready to say, if you don't mind me jumping in here, is that the United States government made a real issue to literally quote, bomb
Yes.
Iraq back to the Stone Age.
Yes, and they
And they
succeeded.
pretty much did that.
Yes.
Hey, can I suggest that while maybe while Jack talks, all the rest of us turn off our mics and see if that helps. Right. And I actually had a quick question for Jack before you go on. I just wanted, in addition to what you're saying, if you talk a little bit about how extensively used depleted uranium is, and also just, I mean, global warming and the nuclear threat are the biggest existential threats we're facing right now. Maybe just a little bit about where we're standing in terms of the
Well,
threat of nuclear war now.
let's first dismiss the news of the week, which was that there was some amazing advance with fusion technology that, oh, this will be the solution to, the carbon pollution of the future, is now we can do fusion energy. And the only real benefits of the technology that was demonstrated at Lawrence Livermore Lab is really to the bomb makers, so that they really fully understand the microscopic levels that these elements interact with, and they can use that to do desktop simulations of nuclear weapons testing. Yes, fusion is a real thing, and yes, they might have gotten more energy from that little bit, but they didn't count all the energy that went into creating and powering the lasers that fired off that little tiny sample and produced a momentary flash of more energy. It's just absurd. But the nuclear weapons industry has to have an intellectual pipeline to sustain itself. And, Peace Prize winner Barack Obama said, maybe not in this century, or no, maybe not in my lifetime. And then Hillary Clinton said, well, maybe not in this century will we achieve nuclear disarmament. Well, then obviously in the meantime, you need to have the technicians to do that work. To have the critical mass of technicians to do that work, you need a whole infrastructure of an industry ostensibly to make energy from nuclear power. So the nuclear weapons industry depends upon this whole institutional structure that supports the nuclear power industry. And then there are all the ancillary industries to deal with all the waste that are going to go on forever. I guess I was going to come around back to just thinking about Iraq and thinking about, in Iraq in 1991, the United States expended about 300 tons of depleted uranium munitions. Most of that came from the A-10 aircraft that fly over our heads here in Tucson. James and I see those aircraft every day. Most of that depleted uranium came from those aircraft, and it was fired indiscriminately throughout the air war against Iraq in 1991. And then again in 2003 and 4, another estimated 175 tons of depleted uranium was also used against the Iraqi population and left littering the landscape in contaminated tanks, battle areas, open areas along the highway going to Kuwait. The impact can never be known because there wasn't good baseline data to begin with. The United States resisted for years, even disclosing where depleted uranium was used so that the Iraqis in the 1990s could begin to do any kind of remediation. And the United States has still refused to submit most of those locations. They had to submit some of those coordinates to the Dutch government at some point, because the Dutch government had sent soldiers to Iraq and they demanded through NATO to know where the depleted uranium had been used. And then the Dutch organization PAX was able to extract some of that information from their government. And that's the only information that the Iraqis now have to say, well, where was the depleted uranium used? Where do we need to be cleaning this up in the future? So that's just a glimpse of the problems. And to bring it into the present, last week, the United States announced that it was selling, depending on how you want to talk about foreign military sales, the United States was giving to Poland as a NATO partner the M1 Abrams tank and the attendant depleted uranium tank ammunition. That's where the other 10% or so of the depleted uranium used in Iraq in those two wars came mostly then from the tanks that fire a big, huge depleted uranium round. And they've now been given to Poland, which is just across the border from Ukraine. And the international campaign to ban uranium weapons that I'm a part of is now in the beginning explorations of a fact-finding mission to Ukraine to find out if indeed Russia has perhaps used depleted uranium weapons to add to all of the other military toxins that are introduced into that environment, or if NATO forces have already deployed on some level depleted uranium weapons. It would likely be on the ground, but if you should be alert, if the A-10 aircraft is forward deployed into Ukraine in some configuration, that would trigger that kind of low-level nuclear war in Ukraine that we already saw in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia, and that area in 1999, and previous to that in Iraq in 91, and then again in 2003 and 4. And again, I mean, I'm talking about depleted uranium. That is just one military toxin. The organizing question, I feel like I listened to Camille and I listened to Steve, and I think there's and Aminta and Andrea and James, and I think these are organizers, and I'm just like an activist and engaged in like educating myself and trying to scream and shout and educate other people, because I do think that education is really where it starts. And so in all of our discussions, and I think we all do this, and you have to encourage others to do it too, bring it back to, yes, there is a systemic problem here. I mean, yeah, we all participate in the system. Yeah, we all vote, but we've got to be aware that that's how we're all complicit too. And we all have to be aware that these are systemic problems, and the people to support are the people on the front lines. And that's why I appreciate hearing, you know, about the frontline struggles in Vieques, because I know they're still going on. I think about Vieques and what's happened on the island since then, and I've wanted to go and see Vieques, and I know that if ever I can get there, it'll be right in the middle of the struggle that I remember hearing about 40 years ago, because it hasn't gone away. It's
I was going to add from the question that history and that people owns and know the true history of what's been happening on their own sites. It's very important. In Vieques, I am 23 years old, so I didn't saw what the militarism did. The French, United States, every country that come to Vieques and do what they did. I didn't saw it. I have the privilege that my mom went to the side and protest, and my dad and my family, and that I can ask them how it was, what happened, and it's the real story. But in Vieques, like in other places where the militarism take place, they don't gather all those important facts about the people that survive the actions, and they forget. They just in Puerto Rico we say borrón y cuenta nueva. We erase, and it's a new beginning. And that happens, I think, with a lot of places, that they say, no, I'm going to focus on the individualism, and that I'm going to be better, and I'm going to forget what just happened. And for us that we grew up in Vieques, in our schools, they don't talk about that. We don't have a museum at all that said what actually happened, that we won that war, that we are still in war. And I think that when you give power to the people by owning their own stories, you can aspire to maybe get a degree that could help to find things, as this specifically case of Vieques. I study environmental science, and one of the reasons and main reasons are to give back to Vieques what they want, because we need professionals to defend the place, but we can't have professionals if the place, the people from that place don't know what happened there, what's been going on. And if they don't happen, it will happen again. And I think that teaching the right story, and don't just forget the story, say what really happened. And most of all, the kids and the teenagers that are like sponges, and like Camille said, they are having what they plan in this group of people that think like a way, aspire to be a way specifically. That has been happened, but it has been happening because we forget our own history, because our own people did not count it or tell it, or are suffering on enough trauma to deal with it. And I think that makes us strong, and it gives us the energy to deal with that, because we have it. In other places, the Alianza went to Philippines and talked with other women that have been having the same things, the same expropriation, the sexual offenses, everything. And if you know that somewhere in other place in the earth happened just exactly in your same history, you have energy. You know that you're not alone. But if we don't share our experiences and histories and the real story, right? People do not know it. People do not own it, and will not defend it.
No, definitely. And that's kind of why, I think a lot about historical memory, because there is such a large importance of knowing, not even just the struggles of, the lands that we might have grown up on or where our families are from, but I think fundamentally as anti-imperialists and as internationalists, as people who, we know that these struggles are interdisciplinary, right? And we want to struggle to have access to land. That also means that we want the soil to be fertile, and we want the soil to be clean, and we want to have the resources, to be able to fix our soils, right? Because so much of this, and I think about this a lot, especially within the Americas, kind of where I'm based, right? We have these 500 years of colonialism that have, just developed into racialized capitalism. It has developed into imperialism, and obviously that has consequences around the world, right? And so knowing your history, especially, I think growing up in the States, maybe this might echo or resonate for some of us here. We are not taught the real history of what happened in the US. So much of what actually, what it means to engage in a decolonial struggle is to quite literally unlearn the falsehoods that were sort of thrown down our throats, right? And yeah, I think that, having access to historical memory is so important. When I had lived in Nicaragua for a year, I was mainly working alongside with a revolutionary farmers union that was really fundamental and sort of spearheading and playing a crucial role for the Sandinista revolution. And a huge element that I not only saw just from the activities in the union, but also even from my own family members that have lived there, right, people my age, I'm also 23, university students and whatnot, was that I think a consequence of the revolution was having people know their history. And I think that in places where we're still trying to engage in revolutionary struggle, so much of it is really connecting those fundamental lines, because so much of militarism, it has an impact on our climate, but I think too, I say this especially as a woman, right? Like, there's so much sex trade and sex tourism and violence as a result of war. We have, and like Steve had mentioned too, like the way that the US saw. Sorry. Sao Paulo is really loud and wait till the motorcycle passes. But something that Steve had mentioned, is like during the Vietnam War, you needed racism to be able to basically dehumanize other people, to make other people seem, subhuman, so that you would be fine with killing them, right? And I think that those are all fundamental things that, to happen domestically. I think about the Gulf states a lot, just outside of New Orleans, right? You have Cancer Valley, where, you have many Black New Orleanians that have been living on toxic soil for decades, and they are still fighting for a fully funded relocation. That too is linked to imperialism. That too is linked to the struggles that are happening from Vieques to, still contending and dealing with the tragedies of the Iraq War, to contending and seeing the ongoing struggle for Palestinian liberation now. I mean, what is it, more worse for climate than settler colonialism and apartheid? Yeah, I think it's certainly so elemental for us to be able to link those struggles together, and finding really innovative ways to present that. Sorry, go for it, Steve.
Oh, okay. No, your point about historical memory is really good. And I think it's important to, in thinking about imperialism, to think about what happens in the global South and countries that are targeted by imperialism and really hurt by imperialism, and also what happens in countries like the US. But a movement that I was part of, a resistance movement of soldiers and sailors during the Vietnam War, that's been kind of erased from historical memory. It wasn't that well known even at the time, among anti-war people who weren't connected somehow with that movement. And then it just got pushed aside because US militarism depends upon people looking at soldiers in a certain way, in a way that's not true. And they depend on veterans. We're swimming against the tide, Veterans for Peace, but they want this veterans to be props for more war and more militarism. And as a result, one thing that happens from that is that the actual emotional healing for veterans doesn't happen because the country as a whole, and starting with the powerful forces, the government and the corporations, can't admit what actually happens to people in war, either the people that are targeted by war and are in those countries, or the people that perpetrate war and or that are the instruments of war, like soldiers. And so there's lately a little more talk of moral injury as something that has to do with the suicides, 22 suicides a day of veterans. And moral injury can be what you perpetrate or what you witness. But anyway, I was talking about the resistance movement of soldiers, the resistance movement of the Vietnamese people, this poor rice farming country, for the most part, that beat the most powerful country in the earth. That was one important part, and the civilian anti-war movement was one important part. But the fact that the soldiers and sailors really stopped fighting by the early 70s is very little known, and it's like Aminta was saying, it's part of the historical memory that, and Andrea was talking about that historical memory about Vieques as well. So, yeah.
Hey, I'm going to break
Yeah.
in. I think we should probably wrap things up. So I don't know, Aminta, if you have another question or comment, or if there are any other final comments. But before we wrap up, I'd just like if everybody could briefly share how we can get in touch and find out more about what you're doing, and in particular with respect to Vieques. How can we show more solidarity with that struggle? Because I think a lot of people here don't even really understand to the degree to which it's going on. And of course, being the colonial occupiers, we in the U.S. have a responsibility to resist colonialism in Puerto Rico, but we also have a responsibility to take care of the messes we've created. So maybe a little. Anyway, back to you, Aminta.
Sorry, I'm muted. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and just open it up if anybody has any final comments. I think it's, it's okay if it's pretty open-ended, and then maybe we could go around and sort of say final comments, and then, like James said, where we can stay in touch, and what are some of the most important things that we can all collectively do. I think that anytime we're able to sort of facilitate these kinds of discussions, it's so important for us to also continue staying in communication, right? We might all be really far away, but oh, sorry, getting some feedback. Can everybody make sure they're muted? There we go. And so I think it's so important to have that dialogue be something continuous and readily available. So folks can just jump in. Doesn't have to be too formal.
Aminta, you talked about about how sexual violence is a part of warfare. I don't think that's accidental or coincidental. And then Steve, you talked about damage to the soldiers as well as to the civilian population. One of the things that and James, you raised the issue of how do we organize around that. I think that's part of the answer of how we organize. We're create all things that happen are intersectional. But when we talk about the anti-war movement, we frequently don't loop in the movement of people who are working to defeat sexual violence or to help women recover it. We don't loop in people who are children's advocates working to end malnutrition and lack of educational opportunities. We don't loop in people who deal with disability rights. We don't loop in the healthcare system. But when it gets, when you look at what militarism is doing to the planet, you're also looking at what militarism is doing to the human population, and of course to the ecosphere, to every animal and plant and fungus and everything else that and the geography of the land itself. So it's important, I think, that we bring into the coalition to end militarism those people who have other single issue campaigns that they're running, because how does the Sierra Club talk about ending pollution if you're not talking about ending military pollution? How does the YWCA talk about ending violence against women without dealing with the fact that violence against women is part of the war? And it's not always enemy combatants, by the way. Andrea, you mentioned that the Marines on the Vieques base date the women in, and that's a form of sexual exploitation. So it's one of the things that we can do is focus on the intersectional aspects of the work we're doing and try to educate and pull into the coalition these other groups that are doing work in other areas.
I'll second that. If people would like to read a lot of inspiring history of nonviolent resistance to militarism, they can visit our website, nukeresistor.org, and particularly go and look at all the back issues that are there up to back to I think 1999, maybe 1999 or 2000, there are back issues of the Nuclear Resistor, and you can read about those struggles, because it's challenging when I realize that people Aminta and Andrea's age have known, if they've been in the United States or part of the US empire, they've known nothing but war. I used to organize about a particular intervention here, there, and several other places before the last 20 years, but now it's been perpetual war, and it has presented its own challenge. And so relating everything we do, it started out in PTA when our kids were in elementary school around the corner. I felt like a sore thumb, but I would mention, yeah, if we had as much money as those guys flying overhead, we could do what we wanted to do here at our school.
Well, I would just say what Camille said too about intersectionality and combining issues. I mean, this is very good. We have an international Sao Paulo and Puerto Rico. We are present here, and but you know, I'm also a retired union member, and we're working to bring together labor and climate, and that's a big challenge too. But we need a huge umbrella, and in order to do that, because we're taking on the survival of our species and the planet, and part of it is trying to listen to people well. You know, trying to really, people can change if they're listened to sometimes, and we do. And a lot of what we have to do is one-on-one, and a lot of what we have to do is organizational. Too. All of that. Thank you.
I'm gonna say that definitely the intersectional, it's needed to get to the goal or to the mission, because like we have been saying, the individualism, it's not getting us anywhere. And definitely the organizations that have been just already working for different aspects, working together, give us another perspective, right? And that sometimes we don't have. And the diversity and diversification of people, of experiences, I think that it's the only way that you get another perspective, and you can get another changes or another opportunities to get a new solution. I'm going to say that La Alianza de Mujeres Viequenses, it's on Facebook and it's on Instagram too. We started in the 1999 when David Sanes, a security guard, was the militarism killed him, and then month later the women united. For 11 years they have been working a lot, but for 2013-12, all of those women keep other projects, so they dissolved. In this year we knew that we have been having the same things, and we reunite once again, and we are starting to get another view, another perspective, another solutions, because we know that we have a new world. We don't have the same world that was in 2003. We have another problems, and we have a lot of information for you guys. And another organization that has been working with this specifically is Vidas Viequenses Valen. They work entirely in the cleaning of Vieques. They have a lot of things in their website and in Facebook too. So for me, it's a pleasure to conversate and take another perspective and know that I'm not the only one, right? Fighting or trying to have a better place to live.
All right, y'all, thank you so much. James, I don't know if you also wanted to hop in and say anything, maybe mention a little bit about, I know you both and Camila are with AFGJ, but maybe mentioning something there.
Well, Alliance for Global Justice, we are very much anti-imperialist and anti-war. We focus on Latin America solidarity because we believe, first of all, U.S. imperialism, well, began in North America, and it once we had well, it began, against, it was U.S. was founded taking land from indigenous people, taking land from Mexico. So that's one of the reasons we start on Latin America, because it's where U.S. imperialism starts, but also because we're so inspired by popular movements in Latin America. So we're trying to learn from these movements and apply the lessons here, which is why Camille, for instance, is working with our human rights school, where we're trying to learn or apply lessons that we learned in Latin America here in the U.S. And of course, we are, like everybody else here, trying to make the connection between militarism and the struggle for climate justice. I guess the only thing of course, whoops. I just, yeah, it's, of course, we want people to follow us, come visit us at afgj.org, subscribe to our YouTube channel. By all means, we are looking for donations. It's the end of the year, as I'm sure all our organizations are. But I do want to do a plug just real quick before we go for the United National Anti-War Coalition call to actions, anti-war actions from January 13th to January 22nd. You can just go visit United National Anti-War Coalition website and sign up, organize something in your community, because we can end even this war that's going on right now, that's threatening the whole world. But there are important voices calling for a negotiated end to this war, and no voice is more important than the voices of the people. And just wonderful discussion today. Just very happy.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, it's been really delightful to be able to facilitate. I guess I should probably also just close out, say who I am. My name is
Nice to meet y'all.
Yeah, so nice to meet everyone. And yeah, I've been kind of collabing with AFGJ for a while now. I met James back in Colombia, currently in Brazil right now. And I write on a website, a mixed media website, titled Let There Know, that is also interdisciplinary, and also works with a lot of people in the arts. And we talk a little bit about culture and applying an anti-imperialist analysis onto that as well. So really great to be able to connect with everybody and have this really wonderful discussion. And we'll definitely all keep in touch.
Bye, y'all.